This is Q1 2022 Entergy earnings call summary. They missed expectations on profit. They did, however, beat on revenue. They did talk about the fact that the retail customer, meaning the homeowner, um, uh, has declined as far as revenue is concerned. But commercial has ticked up, and that's all because people are no longer working from home. They're going back to the office, and typically, you're going to make more profit selling electricity to a homeowner than you are a large commercial facility because they are so large, they're able to negotiate on price and discounts and things of that nature. So um, we expect to see the profitability continue to fall off for Entergy. Um, but again, utility, doing typical utility things, they expect their revenue and everything to increase 5 to 7% a year, and so that's really good. They also pay a decent dividend. Right now, the utility sector is doing really well, and I don't expect that to change unless we start to see some broad layoffs happening through the economy. But so far, so good. I did want to talk a little bit about kind of the things that they have coming up, namely the storm securitization that they are filing with the state of Texas, Louisiana, and the city of New Orleans due to the storms in 2020, Hurricane Ida and the winter storm Texas. Um, the weird thing about the way this is happening is Entergy says that their poles and their lines are not allowed to be insured, meaning that there is no insurance company in the world that's going to take on insuring a power line and pole, because, especially in a place like Louisiana and New Orleans, where you have hurricanes almost every season, and they come in, they blow down the power lines, they blow down the poles, and so those just cannot be insured, meaning that Entergy has to foot the cost of repairing those. Typically, what happens is when there are additional costs, because they are a utility, they're usually able to go to the city and to the state and say, hey, listen, we have to spend a little bit money repairing stuff. We're going to have to increase customers' bills. They did say that they expect customer bills to increase by 5 to 6%. And so that's not a whole lot of money, but I do think it is something that customers will feel for sure. Um, the other thing I want to discuss, and I'll go into this a little later, is the way that the money is being given to Entergy. So the state, the city is not just handing Entergy money and saying, "Hey, here's some money, go make your repairs because we need electricity." No, what they're doing is they're saying, "Hey, we're going to allow you to sell a bond, right? But legally, you don't have to put that bond on your balance sheet." And so they're looking at something like $3 billion from Louisiana and New Orleans, respectively. And I believe the number is under $1 billion for Texas. So quite a bit of money that's out there for them to receive. But again, those liabilities will now show up on their balance sheets. The other things I want to bring your attention to is just some of this renewable stuff that they have going on, such as the green pricing tariff, the sunflower solar project. These are things that they are working on and will expect to have completed this year. And so those are expected rather, to add again to their revenue. The other thing that really is neither here nor there, but it is something, is that one of their nuclear plants they're shutting down, but they're trying to sell it. And so they are in something of an agreement with the company, Holtec, as you see down here, to sell this nuclear power plant. But the problem is they haven't gotten it sold yet because of some details that they were not willing to discuss. One of the things that they talked about was the fact that they're shutting the plant down, even if they have not sold it, meaning that they're going to have a plant that's going to consistently incur expenses but they won't be making any money from it. So that's not good. We definitely want to see that come to some sort of positive end. They talked about the cost of nuclear fuel rising, and so they don't want to pay for more fuel, and they just want to be done with this particular nuclear plant because it's going to cost money to revamp it and get it back up to code. So if they're able to sell it, that'll be a great thing. But in the interim, it looks like it's just going to be a hole in their pockets. I wanted to talk a little bit about how Entergy is getting their electricity or how they're making their electricity. As you can see from this graph, most of their electricity is derived from CT or CCGT, which is basically natural gas. They burn natural gas to spin a turbine. Well, I'm sorry, to spin an engine basically that creates electricity, and then the exhaust from that engine goes through a turbine that spins the turbine to create more electricity. So it's a really great way to make electricity, but of course that does require using natural gas, fossil fuels in order to do so. The other large portion of their electricity comes from nuclear, which is what has been considered a clean energy. But as we all well know, nuclear does have its issues. Something that was discussed in the call, something called SMR, a small modular reactor, which was really interesting. And the idea behind an SMR is that it's able to be built in a factory because it's a small nuclear reactor that can be built in a factory, almost mass produced, and then sold to utility companies to then put into production. And as the utility company needs more electricity, they're able to purchase more SMRs and simply just add it to the SMR that they already have to create more electricity. So this is really just another step forward in that nuclear um, uh, form of energy that I really think we're going to see a lot more of in the future. The other thing that I want to bring your attention to is this number up here at the top that says renewables. Only 2% of their current energy production comes from renewable sources. The environment and renewable energy is a really hot topic. It's been around for at least a decade now, but it still remains a very small portion of many utility companies' ways of getting electricity. Most of us consuming electricity right now are still getting it from coal and nuclear and natural gas. Um, Entergy, for their part, seems to only go into renewables to appease their commercial customers because the governments are putting um, pressure on commercial entities to clean up their electricity. And so that means that these companies have to go to a utility company that has renewable electricity in their portfolio. And so that's what Entergy has been doing. But again, it's still only 2% of their total electricity production. This goes back to the Corning call that we just did maybe a week ago, where Corning said that they are manufacturing solar panels as fast as they can and selling them even faster. And so while there are lots of renewable energy projects going on, um, again, it still remains a very small number. So while I do think that Corning is still in a great position to capture a bit of that market, I am skeptical as to exactly how much money is really out there for them. Entergy says they have about 12 billion in their pocket to put towards projects, and some of those projects will for sure be solar. But again, I don't think that solar is going to get a bulk of that money. Let's take a look at exactly what solar projects they have going on. So right now, you see at the top in service, right? And so we see that number is 660 megawatts. All right. Now, approved in progress. That means that these are solar projects that have already been approved. They already have permits, and they're actually starting to build these things. All right. And they expect them to be in service in 2022 and 2023. There's a few that are to be determined, But all of these are going to be in places that, where they have service, in New Orleans, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Texas. What I want to bring your attention to, though, is the megawatts. Okay, so you look at the megawatts here. Remember, this is all relative. Okay, look at the small number for megawatts. All right, we're talking about doubling their renewable energy production by 2023. So, I mean, that's a big number. I mean, you're doubling your renewable energy. But if you go out to announced and regulatory filings pending, meaning that they've already, they've already put pen to paper, they've already maybe dedicated some money, and they're just waiting to get approval to start building. Again, these numbers look fairly small, but again, um, increases their renewable um, energy production by almost 50%. Here's what worries me. When you go out further, and these are RFPs. RFPs means that this is just paper, right? This is just something that they put on paper. They, they haven't filed anything with the states. They just put it on paper and said, "Hey, this is what we want to do," right? But the filings haven't taken place yet. But look at the large numbers here, right? And we're talking about 4,000 megawatts, which basically more than doubles their renewable energy production. But their estimated time in service is 24, 25, 26. Entergy discussed having all this stuff done by 2030, which has been a deadline that's been put in place by many, many governments, both state and federal, across the world, to reduce carbon footprint by 2030. And so, again, I think there's a lot of commercial customers that need this, right? And so they need a utility company that's going to provide their renewable energy so that they can be in line with what the EPA and all these different organizations want to have done. I do want to say, though, the thing that has always uh, uh, kind of made me hesitant about this is that all this stuff is predicated on lots of government tax credits and government regulations that can change at any time, right? And I'm saying anytime, but it's a lot more to it than that. But the point is that the government can back away from this. Basically, they can leave the law on the books, but decide, not to really, um, not to push it, right? Meaning that the minute that you tell these companies that they don't have to do this, they're not going to do it. And then Entergy is going to be either left holding the bag on some of these projects, or these projects are just never going to get done. And so, while I do think that renewable energy is great of an idea, as you can see, currently only 2% of their energy production, and even after they get down to this 4,000 number by 2030, that's still only going to be maybe 10% of their energy production. So, and the other thing, so solar and wind in places like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Texas, maybe some wind stuff. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. And when you think about places that get, lots of sun, when you think about places that are very windy, you don't think about these places. I can imagine that maybe the wind coming off the Gulf in the south of Louisiana, maybe that's a thing, but I'm just not so sure about that. So uh, again, these projects are there on paper, but nothing has been done, and I don't know if they will get done. Um, we'll just have to wait to see on that. The nuclear, I think, is really kind of where we are going as a country, and maybe even as um, a global um, population, right? I mean, most countries, especially third world, are still using a lot of coal and stuff like that. But nuclear is something of a cleaner option, especially if we can forward the technology to really make this work safely. The other thing I wanted to discuss, I alluded to this earlier, is the off-balance sheet securitization. Okay. Um, Again, when these utility companies go to these states, they go to these cities, and they say, "Hey, we need to repair some things, but we need help doing that, right? And while we can potentially raise prices in order to help, we don't want to raise prices too high for your citizens. So, we need some money. And so instead of the states and the cities just giving the money to these utilities, what they're doing is they're saying, we'll allow you to sell a bond. You will have to pay the money back with interest, but you won't legally have to put this on your balance sheet. And that presents a real issue for investors. Imagine marrying someone, right? Becoming financially tied to someone who owes, I don't know, $1 million or something, but legally they don't have to tell you, right? Because when you sit down and you go over a balance sheet, you go over a profit loss statement, you assume that that's it, right? So with these utility companies, even though it's not on their balance sheet, they do allude to it in the notes in the financial statements, meaning that you really have to read through the terms and conditions, the fine print, to figure out exactly what it is they own, exactly what they owe. It is very possible that when you look at the assets, let's say assets are $100, let's say liabilities are $50, that looks like a really good company, right? Because they own more than they owe. And then you read through the notes and you find out that they have like $150 of liabilities that's not on the balance sheet. Well, now they owe more than they own. And that is a real issue. I mean, we're talking about, billions of dollars here. So um, Entergy is positive that they will get these approved and they will get the financing needed to make the repairs that they need to make. But the fact that these liabilities are not going to be on the balance sheet is a bit disconcerting. So it's definitely something I'm going to continue to monitor. Personally, when I go through financials and I do a deep dive on a company, I definitely look through all those notes and I really do my very best to find every little detail you can imagine concerning exactly what it is they own and what they owe and why. But this is just something to keep in mind. This is particularly common with banks. And so one of the terms that you'll see here in this definition are CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. Okay. And this goes back to the housing crisis that we experienced in 2008 that brought us to recession. Because what happens is you have all these banks, you have all these financial companies that owe all this money, right? But no one knows it because it's not legally on the balance sheet. And so while you may think that the bank that you're banking with is profitable and the bank has the cash to cover your deposits, they may not. What if the bank owes more than they own? Well, that's the definition of bankruptcy. So you're doing business with a bankrupt company. And so it's really important that we keep that in mind when evaluating some of these companies that they may have off balance sheet items that you may not be aware of unless you, like I said, do a deep dive and read through the terms and conditions in those financial statements to really figure out what's going on. So again, just something to kind of keep in mind, specifically when it comes to utilities, because this seems to be the typical way that business is done anytime there's any kind of storm. The other thing I want to discuss is the storm season. It is coming. Entergy talks a lot about the need for resilience, meaning that they really need to build out infrastructure to make sure that they can deal with the storms that they know are coming. They're definitely coming. I mean, here in Mississippi, Louisiana, South Texas, the storms are coming. And so money is needed to build out the infrastructure to make sure you can deal with that. Where that comes from seems to be these off balance sheet items. It comes from selling stock. It comes from going out and getting loans. And we know that with interest rates increasing, those loans are going to be more and more expensive. Even with those off balance sheet bonds, I mean, what is the interest rate going to be? All this stuff is being done in backroom deals and it is kept from the public. But these are public companies that serve the public. I mean, we're talking about our electricity, right? And I think it's really important that we all are very aware of our electricity company, their profitability, and what they're doing and how they're doing it. If you're telling me that you have a CEO making millions of dollars a year, but he's running the business into the ground, that's something that we kind of need to know. Um, the other thing too is that if we don't if we don't figure out a way to either get the money that's needed into the utility company's hands in order to make the proper repairs, in order to build out the proper infrastructure, um, either they're going to have to raise prices or, we're going to have to figure out something else, right? There's just no way around it. So anyway, just something to think about, something to keep an eye on. Otherwise, I think the Entergy is doing a great job. I think they're in a really great market because there's a lot of energy companies or refiners and things of that nature in Texas and Louisiana, and that is most of their customers. And so I think that industry is going to do really well for a long time, and all of these oil refiners and things of that nature are going to need electricity, and they're going to purchase it from Entergy because they are the biggest and in some cases the only utility provider in those areas.